Hello, everybody. Welcome. So happy to have you here. I am looking over at the other screen, attempting to. All right, we are live on Instagram as well. Okay, guys, thanks for bearing with me there. All right, I think we're good to go. Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. And I'm excited. This is an actual live. So we are here live with you. Christina is live streaming from Virginia, and I am live streaming just north of Chicago, Lake Geneva. So really excited to have this conversation with you all. And so first and foremost, I do want to welcome everyone. I'm really glad you're tuning in today, regardless of whether or not you're watching the live or maybe you're catching the replay. Lots of really good stuff in store for you today. To kick things off, I just want to kind of ask a question, and that is, how do you decide what is the best probiotic for your client or your patient? So that is the question of the day. You might have clients or patients asking you that question, or maybe you're wondering for yourself. The thing about that, and this is what we're going to dig into in much more detail, is that question might actually be missing the mark, believe it or not. So today we're going to be kind of more or less flipping the script on probiotics, because the real question at hand should be, which probiotic best supports your metabolic health, right? So that brings us to today's topic, which is entitled Beyond Digestion, Akkermansia, and Metabolic Health. And I'm really excited to be joined by Christina O'Connor. She is a registered dietitian and senior healthcare account manager at Pendulum Therapeutics. Love that company. And Christina brings a deep expertise into the microbiome space. And we're diving into the science and practical application of Akkermansia, which is the strain that really seems to be shaking up the really the whole probiotic space and takes things far beyond digestion. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. One more quick thing before we do, though. If you haven't already, be sure, if you like the content that you get today, be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow on Instagram. It really, really does help. All right, with that being said, let's jump in. I can't wait to have this conversation today. Christina, how are you?
I'm well. I'm hot. It's hot here in Virginia, but other than that, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very hot as well. I'm not quite sure what made me turn off my air conditioning. I think I thought it was going to cool off a little, but here we are, sweating to death. So yeah. I don't really like having air on for some reason. It just kind of makes me feel, like I can't hear the birds chirp, and I don't know. So I'm always quick to turn it off.
It's expensive, right? So it's not running super cold by any means.
Well, I would think in Virginia, you almost have to have it on. Like it, oh my God, it has to be so hot where you are. So yeah. Okay. So let's start things off. So you're, tell us a little bit about yourself. I read just a couple snippets of your bio, but you're an RD, which is amazing. And your area of expertise is that beautiful thing called the microbiome. And I just say that because, sometimes I still just kind of chuckle to myself, like, yeah, when I went to school, there wasn't such a thing, or there was, but never came up, right? It just wasn't part of the conversation. So we've come a long way. So tell us a little bit how you moved, your area of educational focus in this particular space.
Yeah, now that you mention it, the gut microbiome was not really touched on when I was in school either. I started my career in the NICU. So I spent a couple of years as a NICU dietitian at our local children's hospital, which was an incredible experience. And that's really where I fell in love with the gut microbiome. So just seeing preterm infants and sadly, seeing them suffer with necrotizing enterocolitis, and our neonatologist saying things like, well, I just really don't understand why this happens, and reading the research and just trying to understand like the environment that they were in and what was affecting the gut got me super interested in the organisms that are living in there. And then when you pair that with human milk, with breast milk, that's just a really cool story. So that's how I fell in love with the gut microbiome, and worked my way to Pendulum.
Okay. So in the NICU, did you suspect that the microbiome was off and therefore maybe contributing to some of the additional challenges these little tiny babies were experiencing?
Yeah, so fragile. And we know that the environment, the organisms that are living in the ICU are very different from, what we're experiencing in everyday life. And then also they were given antibiotics continuously, right? Because we're just always worried about infection. And that, that played a role. And then, if you sort of made it through that really difficult period, then when you started feeding, the differences between cow's milk protein and human milk protein and the effect that had on the gut as well. And just, we know, actually, interestingly enough, that Akkermansia, the only food that it's ever been isolated in is breast milk. So that just sort of goes full circle.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so right out of the gate, I'm going to ask kind of an off-the-cuff question. Since you were in the NICU, I'm thinking this might be in your wheelhouse, but talk to me a little bit about babies born via C-section.
Yeah, so we know that when babies are born vaginally, they're basically getting, and this might sound gross, but it's what's happening. They're basically they're pretty much getting a fecal microbiome transplant. So that's where the mother's microbiome really plays a role in the setup for the infant microbiome, and the vaginal birthing process, the vaginal canal, and then, like I mentioned, sort of that fecal microbiome transplant that's happening. All of that contributes to the organisms that baby is sort of starting out with. So when you're born in a sterile environment via C-section, then those organisms are completely different. And then you're also not getting those two really important exposures through the vaginal canal. And then, like I mentioned, the transplant.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. So I have two kiddos that were both born via C-section. And I always kind of wondered, because they're very, very healthy now. Like they never get sick. But when they were little, oh my goodness, ear infections all the time. I mean, it was kind of ridiculous. All the ear infections. Like I was like BFFs with my pediatrician, because we were there constantly. So.
Well, and Colleen's origin story, Colleen is our chief scientist, our CEO, one of our founders, and one of her daughters, which this is her story and she tells it all the time. So but one of her daughters was born prematurely. So, and she always noticed that, after all of the antibiotics that she received as a baby, she noticed that she had different allergies and sensitivities that the rest of the family didn't have. But I say all that to also say, you can do all the things. You can have a vaginal birth and breastfeed, and then you still end up with a kiddo like mine who has asthma, allergies, ear infections. Like,
and it's super complex, but we do know, full term vaginal birth, if given the option, and that of course is the key. If given the option, is definitely the way to go. Super interesting. Okay, so let's dig in. So many people just are not familiar with, like the connection. Like we always think about gut health, right? What is the best probiotic to improve gut health? And I'm actually seeing a lot of ads like on YouTube. I mean, just like tons of ads for for improving gut health with probiotics. So it's kind of an interesting time. That being said, can you kind of walk us through the research and what we need to know as clinicians when it comes to metabolic health? Because before I met you guys and Pendulum and became familiar with Akkermansia, I was like, wait, what? It was shocking to hear that there was a connection there. So walk us through, if you can, what we need to know and the research out there supporting using Akkermansia for metabolic health.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pendulum is a unique company in that we're the first to manufacture live Akkermansia. And so before Pendulum came along in 2004, sort of the probiotic industry and the landscape was the same Lactobacillus and Bifidobacteria strains, which are incredible for human health, right? A lot of people benefit from those strains, but they're also strains that you can find in your fermented foods. They're found in your yogurts. They're found in your environment. And so they can be exposed to oxygen, which makes them really easy to grow. And which that makes them great to be able to put into supplement form. Whereas Akkermansia, if you do a Google search and look up, what are the top keystone strains for human health? And keystone just means they're strains that are really important for us and for our human gut microbiome. And when they're missing, we see a lot of negative downstream effects. And Akkermansia is one of those organisms, but it's not like those other strains that I mentioned. So it's not like the Lactobacillus or the Bifidobacteria. It is a strict anaerobic strain that lives in the colon. So a single molecule of oxygen will destroy this organism. So until very recently, no one attempted to grow this bug and make it available in supplement form. Pendulum came along. They started looking at Akkermansia and just all of the incredible benefits that this organism provides for us as the human host, which we can touch on, like you mentioned, metabolic health and just sort of gut barrier integrity. But then the obstacle became, well, how do we grow this? And so we invented the technology. It's a super innovative company to be able to grow this organism and keep it alive and then make it available in supplement form.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can touch on the metabolic piece next if you'd like for me to go there. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
While we do that, I'd love to hear, again, regardless of if you're here live or maybe you catch the replay, drop us a line and let's have a conversation about, any questions that you have regarding Akkermansia. You can tag myself, Christina, and we'll get your questions answered. So yeah, I'd love to hear, let's dig into that science around the metabolic component.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know when there are metabolic issues, there's sort of this underlying degree of inflammation that exists with like type 2 diabetes, for example. And Akkermansia is really good at combating both of those issues. So the loss of gut barrier integrity and then also, the metabolic process not necessarily working as well as it should. So Akkermansia is a butyrate producing bug, and butyrate is it's a short chain fatty acid, and it's really the key to unlocking the GLP-1 hormone in the gut. So a lot of people, I'm sure your practitioners know, but the public is very aware of GLP-1, but they don't necessarily know that it's a hormone that is made by the gut. And so essentially when you're restoring when you're restoring Akkermansia and some of the other organisms that Pendulum grows, you're restoring the bugs that are meant to do these functions of metabolism by way of making butyrate for us. So when we consume fiber, these strains actually ferment the fiber that we eat, and they give us back butyrate in return. And then additionally, Akkermansia is a mucin-loving organism. So its full name is Akkermansia muciniphila. And so it's working on that gut barrier integrity. So I'm sure everyone's heard of leaky gut or intestinal permeability. And so Akkermansia is in there making sure that the gut barrier stays nice and strong and renewed and refreshed. So we're helping to reduce inflammation locally in the bowel, but then also systemically throughout the entire body.
Okay. And so let me back up. Who is a good candidate for this particular strain?
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the research, and Pendulum actually studied Akkermansia along with a couple of other butyrate producing organisms. And we studied this formulation. It's called our glucose control formula. And we studied this in type 2 diabetics. So these are people, they have full blown type 2 diabetes. And we wanted to look at, can we impact their A1C, right? So looking at their glucose and how it's been over the last 3 months. And then can we also impact their after meal glucose spikes, so their postprandial glucose spikes. And what we found, we had them, we didn't have them change anything about their diet or their lifestyle going into the study. And we found that after 3 months of taking this probiotic formulation, they were able to lower their A1C by 0.6, which is enough to take someone from being a diabetic down to being a pre-diabetic, or from being a pre-diabetic to just nothing at all. And then we were able to impact their after meal glucose spikes as well. So we were able to lower those by almost 33%. Yeah, it's huge. And you can compare that to, taking metformin, and it matches up pretty well with that medication. Yeah.
And this is for blood glucose control. It's called glucose control.
Yep.
That's the name of the product, right?
Yep. That's the one. Has a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. And what's unique about Pendulum is that we did that study on our finished product. So we didn't, a lot of probiotic companies they'll look at the research that exists on certain strains, and they'll sort of pull that in and say, well, you can get all of these benefits because all of these strains are in this probiotic. And they source the ingredients from other companies, which is fine. But Pendulum owns the process from beginning to end. So we're growing the strains, we're manufacturing them, and then we're studying the formulations as well.
Okay. Yeah. So that's really, really interesting that you're doing the clinical trials with your finished product.
Yep. That's exactly right.
So I think it would be fair to say that we cannot assume we're going to get those same results. Like maybe not, but we just don't know because it hasn't been actually, I don't know if it's been studied, but it may not have been. So, because I am seeing other companies, and I couldn't even name any off the top of my head, but I am noticing them coming out with Akkermansia strains. But the problem that I'm ascertaining from our conversation is that the clinical trials may or may not be there.
Yeah. And a lot of these companies, so Akkermansia has become really popular and really trendy for good reason, because it's an incredible strain. You can look at the literature and pretty much pick any disease state and then also pair it with Akkermansia and see that Akkermansia is playing a role. So again, it's for good reason. But a lot of these companies are manufacturing pasteurized Akkermansia, which is more of like a postbiotic. So by definition, in order to be a probiotic, the organism needs to be alive. But the pasteurized Akkermansia, being a postbiotic, still does offer some benefits for us as the human host, but you're just not getting the complete full benefits that you would get from the organism being alive. And some companies have come out and said that their organism was alive, but they're not growing the organism. And where are they getting it? Because Pendulum doesn't supply our grown Akkermansia to anyone. So it's just important that you do your research and that you know exactly who it is that you're buying from.
Okay. that makes a lot of sense. So in terms of, so we've got the glucose control, which is kind of the superpower, right?
Yes, it's at the top.
And it's the efficacy, which I did not know until this very conversation, is comparable to metformin.
Yes. Yeah. So metformin's range for lowering A1C is around 0.7 to 1.2. And we were able to achieve that 0.6.
Okay. Okay. That's unbelievable. I mean, who wouldn't rather take something natural that is, like good for your gut than a medication or a prescription?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe there are some people. All right. I get it.
I tell this story because my mom was diagnosed a couple of years ago with type 2. And I was like, Mom, this was before I was working at Pendulum. Mom, this is the answer. You have to take this product, glucose control. It's going to solve everything. Yeah. And her response was, she looked at the price, and then she was like, well, insurance is going to pay for metformin. So that's definitely the route that I'm going to go. So it's not for everybody, but it is for the patient who is looking to get to the root cause, right? Okay. For me personally, I want to know, what's my body missing? What can I do to help it so that it can do these functions that it's supposed to do naturally, right? I just want to give my body back the tools that it needs. And so that's how I consider these organisms.
Okay. I love that. So I know that some of the gut health tests are testing for Akkermansia. So, which I think is very exciting. Do you have any comments on that in terms of, the, I guess, number one, accuracy, and then also like kind of moving into a conversation around patient types? Let's say you've got a patient who is maybe not, their A1C's relatively decent, right? Maybe not stellar, but let's just say decent. But yet their Akkermansia is wiped out. Which is what I hear a lot. I do hear like on the tests when they actually look at the levels, that a lot of times it is pretty much non-existent. So can you walk us through your thoughts and ideas around all of that? I know it's kind of a lot, but
yeah, absolutely. So I am still navigating the very complicated world of stool and gut testing. It is it's an interesting science. And our founders, actually, that's where they have their background in DNA sequencing. So it's like a second language for them. But I'm still trailing behind, like trying to keep up and learning all of this. But what I have learned is that companies that use, it's called shotgun sequencing, is typically the most sensitive, then the most accurate, and then is also going to tell you, like, it tells you who's in there and then also what they're doing. So there are a couple of companies, and there are more than one, but the first one that comes to mind is a company called Tiny Health. They have this like really comprehensive stool test that is, again, like I mentioned, it's comprehensive, it's sensitive, and it tells you who's in there and what they're doing. And they're an interesting company because they sort of took that initiative to look at mom's gut microbiome, because they knew and realized like that's being passed on to baby, like that's where it starts. So now they offer stool testing for everyone, but that's how they kind of got their start, which is near and dear to
That's fascinating. So it's called Tiny Health. That is not what I'm familiar with.
Yeah, there's GI Map, there's diagnostic solutions, that a lot of practitioners are familiar with and using. And I think those are also, I don't think that all of the technology is exactly the same, but more recently I've been learning about this shotgun sequencing and how that is like the most accurate test available.
Okay. All right. Super interesting. So accuracy, were the jury's out, would you say, or are you feeling pretty good, like with some of the other tests outside of Tiny Health?
Yeah, I think as a practitioner, like if it were me and I was recommending a stool test for my patients, I would
Mhm.
want it to be one of those shotgun sequencing tests.
Okay.
So also qPCR, that's something that Colleen talks about all the time.
Okay.
So if it has sort of those two key elements, then you're guaranteed that. And stool testing is not an exact science, but it does give you a little bit of a picture of like who's in there and what's going on.
Right. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Do
Okay.
you want to dive into patient types
Yes,
next?
yes, yes. I love
Okay.
talking patient types. And for our audience, the reason, well, it might be very obvious, but I love talking patient types because it helps us kind of wrap our mind around, who should we be looking for in our own private practice that would be a good candidate for this therapeutic approach. So yeah, kind of if you could walk us through, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it really, you kind of have two categories. So anybody that is dealing with inflammation,
Okay.
and you suspect that there's some intestinal permeability issues going on. So like we talked about with our kiddos having multiple back-to-back ear infections, which are always treated with antibiotics. That's a perfect candidate. Somebody who grows up and just has a messed up gut. They have all of these IBS type symptoms. You suspect inflammation and you suspect that the gut is permeable. They really need these organisms. They really need Akkermansia, especially if you test the stool and you see that Akkermansia is low. That kind of confirms your suspicion. So that would be a great patient population. Those folks that have food intolerances, a lot of times those food proteins are sneaking through that gut barrier. And that's what causes the sensitivities and the allergies to those foods, because the immune system is saying like, you're not supposed to be here. I don't know who you are. Like, I don't recognize you. We're inflamed. We're allergic. We don't like that particular food. And it may not necessarily be that you're fully allergic to it, but those proteins are getting into circulation and they shouldn't be there. So that's another good candidate. But then you have your metabolic patients, right? So we talked about our type 2 diabetics. The glucose control was studied in those patients. So of course they're going to be a great candidate. But then you also have your patients who maybe they're on the GLP-1 injections and maybe they're looking to get off of them. That's another great, we have a lot of healthcare practitioners that are using our very specific formulation. It's called GLP-1 because it just has the strongest GLP-1 producing organisms in that product. And they're using it kind of like as a companion product. So as patients are thinking about transitioning off of the injections, they're using these strains to not only help with the GI symptoms, but also to help with the food cravings. So that's been another really great patient population.
I don't know if I knew about that product.
Yeah, so it's just Akkermansia, another strain called Clostridium butyricum, and B. infantis. So it's just those three, but those three organisms are the best at helping the gut to make its own GLP-1. So it's been a great companion product for the injections.
Oh gosh. Okay. So, all right. So I'm curious if our audience is familiar with that particular product. I mean, it seems like a great opportunity to really assist because, we know so many of our patients and clients are taking the peptide injection. So, so what I'm hearing is it can potentially augment perhaps efficacy during treatment. And then it can also be helpful once we're tapering off of treatment, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, that's incredible. Okay, so any other patient types that we want to talk about?
Even like your pre-diabetics,
Yeah,
like
yeah, let's dig into that group. That group is super fascinating
yeah,
because,
go ahead.
they're not quite there, but in our world, we're all about prevention. So, we want to be on top of it. But yeah, not always the case I guess it just sort of depends on the practitioner philosophy, right? So talk to me about, like the woman who's, maybe perimenopause, maybe a little closer to menopause or actually through it, and just starts to notice that her labs are falling apart, going awry, going off the tracks, all the things that tend to happen. So tell us about that patient type.
Yeah. So that patient type is me. And I just did a random blood test at a health conference that I was at. I think it was like maybe 2 years ago now. And like everything was good. Everything was normal except for my A1C. And I was floored, right? Because I'm a dietitian, like I exercise regularly, I eat healthy, like how can this be?
Okay.
So I set out on a mission to course correct.
Yeah.
And I will say that a continuous glucose monitor has been a game changer for me. Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't think I'll ever go without one, because what raises one person's blood sugar may not raise another person's blood sugar. And so it was really about figuring out which foods my body was, reacting to. So that coupled with I chose the glucose control. But interestingly, the recommendation for that product and the studied dose was actually 2 capsules a day.
Yes.
I found that I was able to achieve similar results just taking 1 capsule a day, because I was not full blown type 2, just, kind of hovering around the pre-diabetic range. So you get 60 capsules in that bottle. So that makes the price like a little bit more tolerable if people are. Yeah, you stretch it out, it lasts you 2 months. So I really like using that sort of off label for the pre-diabetic. And then when you have your patients wearing a CGM, they can see in real time how the product is working for them. We have, our dietitians, of course, like we love to experiment here. And one of our dietitians did cupcakes with the kids at night without glucose control and cupcakes at night with the kids with glucose control. And the spike is like night and day. It's dramatically reduced. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So yeah, if
honest.
people are wanting a natural approach, like I mentioned earlier, giving your body back the tools that it needs to perform these functions, when you couple it with diet and lifestyle, it really works.
Okay. Yeah. So anyone, I'm just looking at over on Instagram. Hello, everybody. Yeah, the CGM I think is amazing. I personally, I know I've talked about this on some of my past live streams, just how much I have learned from that. Oh my gosh, really, really significant. I have not, I'm going to do that experiment though. You really have me curious to
Yeah.
see all the curves, the difference with glucose control and without. So I'm definitely going to try that out. I'm wondering, so basically we're looking at, like that pre-diabetic patient. And by the way, before I go on, did your A1C go down? Okay.
Yes,
So
significantly.
down
So
dramatically?
yeah, it was at 5.6, and after just a few months of modifying my diet and taking one a day of the glucose control, it was down to 5.2.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
that was just after 3 months. So I haven't checked it again recently, but I'm sure it's even lower because I've been sticking to it.
That's fabulous. Okay. So my next question is like duration. So I know the end goal is to reinoculate the gut, right? We want to get those bugs growing, right? And we want to provide those bugs with all the fuel they need in order to take root and grow. Can you talk to me about that? Like, is this is this therapeutic approach like kind of a lifetime thing, or are we able to discontinue at a certain point? And like, how do we know?
Yeah, great question. We are trying to figure that out because what we've researched, the data that we're getting is a little bit mixed. So I'll tell you what we do know. In the glucose control study that I mentioned, after the washout period, which the washout period is, they didn't take any of the products or the strains for like a 4-week period of time. We saw 20% of the people hung on to some of the strains like Akkermansia or some of the butyrate producers, but the majority, 80%, did not hang on to anything. So after the washout period, everything was gone. But if you recall, there were no dietary or lifestyle interventions in this study. So our hypothesis was, well, maybe that 20% was eating a healthy diet. Maybe they had a diet rich in polyphenols and fiber. And so maybe that's why the strains were able to hang on.
Yes.
And so with these being live organisms, there is sort of a thought that maybe, like I mentioned, if they're fed polyphenols and fiber, that they could stick around and this wouldn't be something that you would have to take forever. But yeah, we still don't quite know enough, but we're leaning towards it might be possible. But a minimum of 3 months. So that's how long the clinical study was done on the glucose control. So you have to be able to invest like the full 90 days. But then beyond that, some people, they continue to see results, they continue to see the A1C dropping. And so they end up staying on it. My mom is a great example. After I started working at Pendulum.
Got mom on it?
Got mom on it. Yeah, because, it's no charge now. So she takes it along with her Ozempic. And she asked me for it all the time. Like, hey, I'm out. I need more glucose control. So I asked her at Christmas time, I was like, what is it doing for you? And her response was, it just helps me not eat as much. And that's beyond the Ozempic. So that was kind of cool to hear. So she's been on it for about a year now. And I don't really have any plans to take her off because it's just working for her.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, if there's no financial constraints and she's okay with swallowing pills, like what would the disadvantage be? None.
Exactly.
Right? Yep. Okay. So I think that's amazing. Okay. All right. So how do we know what product to recommend? Because we have the GLPs or the GLP, what is it called? GLP, like the synergistic.
GLP-1, just GLP-1 probiotic.
Okay. Okay. So it's called GLP-1 probiotic. We have glucose control, and I'm clear on that one. Like, definitely, if you're wanting to lower A1C, at least we want to start there, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I got that. What about the other? Don't you have one other?
Yep. So the Metabolic Daily is kind of like a step down from the glucose control. So that would be another really great option for your pre-diabetics. You could easily recommend the Metabolic Daily. It's all the same strains that are found in the glucose control, just in a lower amount. And that product is also, I think it's important for your clinicians to know that product is inulin free. So if you have patients with food intolerances, or that they don't do well with the chicory root inulin prebiotic fiber, then that product is the one that is free of inulin. And then so it's been helpful for a lot of people. It's a small amount, but even a small amount can bother some patients. But then the GLP-1, I really recommend that for people who maybe their next move is they think they want to go on the injections, but they want to try one more thing before doing that. We've seen people have a lot of success by just giving their body back those few bugs to jumpstart the GLP-1 production in the gut on their own. But then it's also a great companion product for anybody that's on the injections. I've heard practitioners say that it helps people to last until their next injection, because what I've heard is that like when it's time for you to go for your next injection, or time for you to take your next injection, that the food cravings and the food noise will start to come back sometimes. And so the GLP-1 probiotic really helps with that. We actually studied it in food cravings, and something wild, like 91% of the people taking that 3-strain formulation noticed a reduction in food cravings. So it's a great companion if somebody is looking for an off-ramp to stop the injections, or just looking for a companion product, because, you know, you want to make meaningful changes to the gut so that when you come off of the injections, you know, something has been done.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay. All right. Well, that all makes sense. And I feel like at least I have a better understanding of which products fit with which specific patient type. So, and I would just remind our audience, if you end up having questions, let us know. We'd be really happy to answer those, specifically Christina. I'll hand them over to Christina.
Yes, please do. It's my favorite topic.
Yeah, it is. It's really exciting. All right. So as we start to wrap up, any final words of wisdom that you would like to share? Anything that you feel like we want to delve in a little deeper?
Yes. Well, I mean, as dietitians or healthcare practitioners, you know, we're always trying to get our patients to make diet and lifestyle changes as well. So if they can do that, that's only going to be an added benefit. You know, I love dietary sources of polyphenols and fiber. That's really what's feeding these organisms. So I would just encourage you to encourage your patients to make sure that they're including those foods in their diet, because that's going to support not only the pendulum strains, but just microbial diversity and good healthy bacteria in the gut overall.
Okay. Yeah. And that is a topic that I kind of feel like we don't maybe touch on enough, right? Like, okay, we're taking supplements, we're, you know, trying to re-inoculate the gut, but we have to support that process with the fuel that is necessary, which is fascinating, right? Another thing we never learned in school, but is so, so important.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. All right, everybody. Well, that is, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And huge thanks to Christina O'Connor and the entire team at Pendulum Therapeutics for sharing such valuable insights into Akkermansia, as well as the other products, which was a pleasant, unexpected surprise. And hopefully this information will more or less shift the way you're thinking about the utilization of probiotics. So if today's conversation sparked new ideas for how to support your client's metabolic health, don't keep it to yourself. Let's share. I'd be eternally grateful if you shared this episode with a colleague. Maybe drop a comment on your key takeaways. And of course, if you have any questions, let us know. We will get back to you. And just a quick reminder, I'm trying to remember to ask this more frequently. If you like today's content, I would really appreciate a subscribe and follow. And of course, that way you'll never miss a future episode. So I want to thank everyone for joining me today. And I will look forward to next time. So I can tell you next week, we will run a live replay. Okay. So we will be here next week. It will be a live replay. All right. Okay, everybody, have a great, because next week is a holiday, right?
Oh my gosh, already.
How did that happen? I do not know. Crazy. So, okay, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again, Christina. Really appreciate your time today.